And we're live. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I'm your host, Salvador Cordova. This particular show is part of a multi-part series that's going to be happening probably over the next 8 days. This channel, although most of the viewership is from all over the world, literally, there is a good segment that is part of the local area here near where I live, and also members of my own church. So this program today is mostly going to be is mostly focused on dialoguing with members of my own church. So what's going on, just to update everyone on what all this is about, and including people in my own church, there is a critical vote that's happening on July 18th, which is about 8 days from now. And in this vote, it could lead to whether there's going to be a change in leadership over the next few months, major change in leadership. And this could be big turmoil. This is a mega church. At its zenith, it had an attendance of close to 19,000 people on Sunday morning, and church attendance has dropped, not just because of the pandemic, but also because of some things going on in the church, which I'm going to cover. The church has ownership over properties probably valued in the range of from 100 to 200 million dollars. There's a lot of money at stake there. If the church is liquidated, it's going to be interesting. There could be some parties that could actually profit from this. So whenever there's whenever congregations are that large and own that much property collectively, this is like a corporation where you have shareholders and who have voting rights. They can decide the outcome, the direction of the collective vote can decide the outcome of who becomes in leadership and which way the corporation or like in business, the direction it can go. So by way of parallel, we've seen where, if I recall correctly, in the business world, we've had situations where a minority owner of say 5% could actually take control of an entire company and influences project his influence to the rest of the 95% of shareholders. This is a dynamic that is almost inevitable whenever that much pooled property and resources are concentrated. And sometimes a lot of the stakeholders just will not exercise their voting rights. And particularly in a church, they could just decide to move to another church. So this is an interesting dynamic. I see Patrick Alexander is here, and you can probably be wondering, Patrick, why I'm having this late night show. I had been in agony thinking about whether I should even have the show. So this show is, as I mentioned earlier, if you joined me late, is really directed toward people who are viewers, who are all my viewing audience here on this channel, who are part of McLean Bible Church, but it will also give an insight to some of the dynamics of mega churches. From a business standpoint, this does concern me that in general, minority, that anytime that an organization gets that big, it is at risk of being controlled by a minority of stakeholders. Let me call them stakeholders. And I have been concerned that that is actually what's happened, and it's not the stakeholders that I'm approving of right now. So there is a conflict going on. And the thing is, I'm taking a risk here by going public, and especially to my brothers and sisters at McLean Bible Church, because when all the dust settles after all the votes that could be taking place as soon as in the next 8 days, and then possibly in the next few months, we could have been on record as being on opposite sides of an issue, and we'll have to be thinking about how to be able to get along after all the dust settles. This has become an increasingly polarized conflict within God's church. And so, just for the record, I voted no against the current leadership. It is the general view that the people who voted no, let's call them the group who voted no, is presently in the minority, but we in the minority feel that our voice has been suppressed by the leadership who we are in opposition to. And so I'm going to cover some of this. I don't know quite how to broach this because this is a sensitive topic, and it does pit me against other people in my own congregation. But these are dynamics that we have to talk about, and I do think it's appropriate to talk about it I have a policy of trying to engage some topics that are difficult, maybe not all of them, and not to run away from them, and especially if I think it's important. It's important. One thing that is important to me is I have tried to see apologetics, the teaching of apologetics, evidence, and reasons for the Christian faith move forward in McLean Bible. Dr. Sandy Pigeon did specifically his PhD dissertation regarding apologetics at McLean Bible Church. It has not been, to my knowledge, received at all by the leadership at McLean, and he invested so much into this. And it was always a fight to get some sort of apologetics ministry having a foothold in a megachurch. And I can tell you just firsthand, I've seen just kind of the cold shoulder we're getting from leadership. This is in a time when many of the younger generation are leaving the church. They're not being nourished. They're not being given answers. They're not being given solutions. So I could tell you firsthand, I'm not liking what I'm seeing. Dr. Sandy Pigeon can speak from himself. I'm hoping that he and his wife, Mrs. Pigeon, will appear on this channel and explain why they left McLean Bible Church. I'm still a voting member. They no longer are. And I can pretty much speak for them, just by guessing, that is, that if they were voting members, they would vote out the current leadership. And Dr. Pigeon was, being a former Navy SEAL, he was part of the first responder team at McLean Bible, which also meant for him in that position, if there were trouble in McLean and some psycho started trying to fire bullets, he would sacrifice his body to save the pastor, the present pastor. So even though he left the church, while he was thinking about leaving the church to go to another church, he was still willing to sacrifice and take a bullet for Pastor David Platt, who's really kind of the focal point of where all this conflict is. But he's not the only one involved. There are other actors in this. So I voted on June 30th against the current leadership with the hope, with perhaps a very reluctant hope. I reluctantly voted against the leadership, and with a reluctant hope that they would be replaced, because the process of replacement can also be pretty messy. So the situation is, however this plays out, the church will have already suffered damage. There's whatever side wins, everyone loses to some extent. This is not a great situation. So yes, I know it's a surprise to see me here late, because I was agonizing whether to actually come up on air, and then also I was doing a little more research. So transparency is very important. Lack of transparency destroyed the church I grew up in. Lots of drama going on behind closed doors. That's exactly, I would say that's the fundamental problem going on here. There are two major problems. One is the lack of transparency, particularly, as you can guess, in finances, money flow. And we don't know how much, I don't know how much the pastors are being compensated and where they're getting their money sources. And it can be a little bit funny how this is kind of being funneled about. And then who are the stakeholders that are outside the church, like the Southern Baptist Convention, who's gotten like maybe $300,000-$400,000 from McLean Bible Church, and it's like, is that all? We suspect there could be more. We're not getting any indication on, there are a lot of unanswered questions that are very disturbing. And we don't know if the pastor's kind of getting some money back from the Southern Baptist Convention. So it goes out of the church, goes to the Southern Baptist Convention. Does he get any compensation back? These are tough questions to ask. And it's kind of hard because when there's someone you respect, you don't want to insinuate anything by asking tough questions, but you have to protect the congregation. In just by way of an analogy, we have children's ministries and children's Sunday schools. A lot of churches will do background checks on the Sunday school teachers, and I don't blame them. They want to know that that a particular Sunday school teacher hasn't been convicted for certain crimes, and you know what I mean? Or arrested or had warrants. Oh, terrible if they have warrants still outstanding on them. Warrants or even prior arrest records, even without conviction. There's just, it's kind of rude to subject someone to that, but are you going to do it for the sake of the kids in the church? And so there are tough questions that need to be raised, and it's kind of hard to raise them without giving the appearance of an insinuation. And this has to be done, but you hope the other side tries to be more forthcoming. And so, again, like I said, going to the parallel model of in the corporate world, where we have a large publicly traded corporation that can basically be taken over by stakeholders that only own 5% of the shares. This can happen. So some of us in the church, many in the church, feel there's been a hostile takeover, and there hasn't been because the takeover was of the leadership can control the flow of information and control the narrative. So let me just say, this past Sunday, David Platt, this senior pastor at McLean Bible Church, was saying that there is a group of people that is, I don't have the exact quote with me, I did actually capture it, but it can be found. I will talk about some articles where you can actually link to the actual sermon, and I may actually dump some links into the chat so that you could find these sermons. But he was saying this group is causing division is being divisive by using disinformation. And he's saying this from the pulpit, and he's accusing members who are unable to defend themselves of using disinformation to try to take control of the church. Disinformation. And I'm like, can a pastor just blanketly say that about people in his own congregation that are members of the church, and they have no opportunity to refute it? Let me cover that even solidified that I'm going to vote no definitely in 8 days, and that might mean that this pastor's job eventually gets removed from his job. And people will ask me, why don't you just leave the church? I have an answer. One, I really didn't. It's the church's policy that you should be a member if you're a regular attender, if you're not a member of a church. So they're saying, okay, you have to be a member. You have rights and responsibilities. If you're a member, you go to congregational meetings and you vote. What's the point of voting if you don't have a chance to dissent with other people? I mean, think about it. If they want 100% unity, just don't have the members vote. Just let all the leadership make all the decisions. They're actually churches that are organized somewhat like that. It's not very common, but you might have someone who's just a very charismatic leader, and he solicits donations, and he makes all the decisions that are financial and who he appoints and the staff he hires and all the policies. That can totally happen, but this congregation's organized differently. So, for me personally, I'd rather not have to have a lot of obligations to vote or not vote. I'd rather it be kind of like a store where if you like the store, you go there and buy your products, and if you don't like it, you don't go back there. But that's not this church said, well, that's not really biblical to treat a church that way. You have to be a part of it. So I'm just responding to some of the critics that have said to me, why don't you just leave? And there are passages in the Bible where it suggests that it's expected a Christian will have someone that's overseeing them and that they're accountable to and who will be teaching them. And I'm fine with that. But if you feel your teacher is the things they teach and then their conduct raises red flags, we have an obligation. We have the right and obligation to confront them in some way and let them know in some way that we disapprove. It says in Proverbs, rebuke a wise man and he'll love you. It's very possible even someone that God calls a wise man can be mistaken. It's perfectly fine to rebuke him and say, hey, dude, that ain't right. And we have even examples of that in the New Testament where Peter was rebuked by Paul. Long after Christ had already risen and Peter had worked miracles, both of them had worked miracles in the Lord, and one guy had to correct the other guy. It happens. And you just move on after you said your piece. And there was a conflict between Paul and I believe someone named Mark. They couldn't agree and they just went their separate ways. It happens. It's okay. God's church will march forward. Sometimes God doesn't make it always clear. And you just do the best you can do. So now off to specifics, and I have my list here. So as I said, there's a July 18th vote. So David Platt is head of the Radical Ministry. He is the senior pastor at McLean Bible. He's head of a ministry that he founded called Radical. McLean Bible donates money to the Radical Ministry. I don't think we've gotten a straight answer how much of congregation money is going to the Radical Ministry. And then it raises questions if money is going to the Radical Ministry that he founded and presumably he can get compensation for, how much is he getting? You could see there's a little issue there. I think it'd be fine if he at least reported it. We could say yes or no, that's okay. But why the silence? Does he get any compensation from the Southern Baptist Convention? So if McLean has been giving like hundreds of thousands of dollars, like $100,000 every year for the last few years, so that'd be about $300,000. Does David Platt get any compensation from the SBC? And then also, it's been suspected that he might be getting compensated for the number of church plants he's planted. There's been anywhere from like 40 to 47 church plants in the Washington, D.C. area. And I have to question that when your own congregation is kind of shrinking, you're going out there trying to plant more churches. most churches that where I've seen church planting happen is the church was getting so big, they actually started splitting off. So I don't know. I don't know what's going on there. Where's the transparency? I also don't know what his salary is and other people on staff. Now, I know that's a sensitive subject, but again, using the shareholder or stakeholder model, I mean, they're accountable to the people that are providing the money and also helping to build the congregation. So I mean that's a decision that can be made, but you could see the optics of this start to be a little disturbing if we're not knowing. Now, one thing that was pointed out at one congregational meeting is that David Platt, even though the church had either low or reduction in force or large numbers of staff, like on the order of like 100 over the last few years, 100 staff members, David Platt got a 20% raise. That just doesn't look good. I don't know what the exact money figure is, but that's what I heard. Now, to be fair, if any of the leaders in McLean want to set the record straight, they can publicly say, okay, this is how much money is going, exactly, when and how much were the checks. They could have done this all by now because people have been asking and there's been silence. That just doesn't look good. That doesn't look good. And this is really kind of hard for me to say this, but David Platt and his associate pastor, it's Mike Kelsey. Associate pastor isn't the exact title of Mike Kelsey. It's something about pastor of culture. Pastor of culture. I mean, that was a new office that was created for Mike Kelsey. You have a pastor of culture, and I'm gonna let me link to a sermon where you can hear they're talking about racial justice. And in racial justice, we have this concept of white privilege. And I was just laughing. I said, okay, so someone's white privilege, they're going to give themselves 20% raise and they're white. I'm like, okay. And I'm going to highlight some problems with this whole thing of racial justice. So for those in McLean, I'm sorry if I'm offending you. You're going to have to live with maybe your brothers and sisters who will be on my side after all this is settled in the next few months. We're going to have to try to cooperate. So I'm just giving you my reasons for a no vote. And it's a reluctant no vote. But I put in the stream just now. So this is, let me identify it. The link is of David Platt and Mike Kelsey speaking on racial justice. Now, the rhetoric is starting to get a little heated on both sides. I think it's a little overblown on both sides of this, and it's not pretty. It doesn't put our church in good light. But let me just throw this out there. Mike Kelsey, in the sermon that I linked to, at about 40 minutes, between 40 minutes and 50 minutes, he had some great points, and then I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about points. He was saying that, one of his great points, he was talking about all the abortions. He's grieving over all the abortions, the millions of abortions that have that have happened in the United States. And he was saying, well, he said, is it tolerable that evangelicals should just sit on the sidelines and not engage this? And of course, everyone will say, no, it's not acceptable. They have to try to stop it. And he said, okay, so what about all the racial injustice? And I'm just like, okay, how do you define racial injustice? Is it just because someone kind of was not as nice to you as you would have expected them to be? And I'm going to give you a specific example that was in that sermon. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'll give you a specific example. I say, that's not something to get so irate over and make a big fuss over. And I'll give you the example. And I'm certainly not going to equate that to something as severe as abortion. And then the other thing is, what do you mean by taking political action? This is going to create an interesting dynamic. So if he's talking about systemic racism and racial justice, what do you mean? Okay, so Mike Kelsey's a black African American, and he's one of the pastors. He's like second in command at McLean. David Platt is the senior pastor. He's white. David Platt has adopted a girl from China. So I presume she's Chinese. Okay? She's Asian like me. God bless him for looking after an orphan. True religion is caring for orphans and widows in their distress. So God bless you, David Platt, for adopting this little girl who's Asian. Now, so let's say this Asian girl, after several years, she's off to college. And she's applying to very fine schools. And a lot of schools in the United States have affirmative action. That means quotas. Like if there are too many Asians, even if they're qualified to enter the college, they're going to be rejected in favor of another demographic group, like African Americans. So I wanted to ask, just rhetorically, okay, so Mike Kelsey, David Platt, what do you think is just? Do you think it's just that David Platt's daughter is going to be denied entry to colleges because she's Asian, solely based on her skin color? Do you think that's right? Do you think that's, is that something to celebrate? So what does Mike Kelsey mean by racial justice? Is that justice? Is David Platt going to be happy? It's like, oh, my daughter got denied entry into college because she's Asian. I'm just throwing that out there. This is why we talk about this divisive rhetoric, and it's like, can you be like a little bit more clear about what you're actually railing against? You want systemic racism? I've given you an example right there. Now, there are reasons, just for the record, why there's an overrepresentation of Asians in colleges. So they might be only 1% of the US population, but if you, in some of these gifted and talented high schools, they could represent 80% of the school population, and in colleges, they could represent, 15, 20%? They're just overrepresented. One of the reasons, and it's something economist Thomas Sowell was observing, is there are cultural differences that you can't run away from. I grew up in an Asian family, and academics was really important. Now, we weren't among the most academically emphasized family compared to others I've seen, but I remember when there was a girl who had a half Chinese. Her father was Caucasian. Her mother was Chinese. And the Chinese mother said, you're going to get straight A's. You have to get straight. I overheard the mom saying that to her daughter. I was like, oh my goodness, that seemed kind of scary. So you want equality? You want more quotas in the colleges? Are you going to go interfere with how parents raise their kids? Are you going to make the Asians maybe not be so hard on their kids? Or are you going to try to make African American families to try to be harder on their kids to do academics? I mean, what are you going to do to fix this? Except run quotas. And so I just wanted to say, you have to question. I have to question what sort of reasoning and depth of understanding these pastors have trying to meddle into this and invoke racial justice. It's just going to be a mess. Do I have the opportunity? I mean, since they're making this, they say they want to be apolitical. That very sermon that I linked to, he was talking about, you got to take action. I'm just like, okay, let's define it. Can we have a conversation about that? So now I'm going to go back to their example of Asian persecution. And I guess probably I can be a little freer to say this because I'm Asian. I probably wouldn't get away with this if I were another demographic. But they showed this pastors parted the McLean. They have several campuses. They had these pastor and his wife who are Asian. I believe they're Korean. If I got their race wrong, I'm sorry. No offense intended. So this Asian woman said she saw, she was in the line of Harris Teeter or something, and the customer ahead of her, the cashier was just talking and conversing. And when that when the cashier was done with that customer, this Asian, the wife of the pastor, was next. And she said, well, the cashier didn't talk to me. I mean, this will sound kind of mean. I wanted to say, what a snowflake. I'm sorry to say that. How do you know that was necessarily racist? It could be, you have no proof. It could exactly be like someone she'd seen every week. Could be a close friend that she's talking to. You just you can't make that inference that it was race. But even if it was race, is that as bad a sin as abortion? I mean, I had racial slurs. I've had racial slurs directed at me. I've had people screaming at me racial slurs. It's not pleasant. It's not pleasant. But not once was I expecting a pastor to say, look how terrible the world is. Look at all the racism going on. And then he's practically, almost pointing his finger at the congregation for not doing something about it. And I was thinking, well, what do you expect them to do? What do you expect them to do? I mean, do you expect them to go to grocery stores and start correcting cashiers? I mean, it's like, come on, guys. And you compare that to some of the other things that are not right in this country. I mean, if you want to take political action, we can have a conversation about it. I pointed out one area. I don't think affirmative action is right. That is such discrimination on skin color and ethnic origin. And I gave the reasons why there can be a disproportionate balance. I said, and Thomas Sowell, the economist, pointed out there are cultural reasons for why certain demographic groups might have control of certain industries, either control or overrepresentation. He said that it's not unique to the United States, and he was even citing, I believe, some African countries where the immigrants move over there, they end up specializing in certain industries. It just happens. It doesn't mean that someone's necessarily being unjust. I'll tell you who's unjust, in my opinion, was when Reverend Al Sharpton was saying, "Look at all the Asian exploitation of blacks because they own all the all the uh, all the beauty salons in Harlem." I'm just like, no one's stopping any other demographic group from setting up in Harlem and making stores to serve the community in Harlem and New York, which is predominantly African American. How can you get that as exploitation? I mean, if anything, I thought Al Sharpton's comments were very anti-Asian, but uh, you know, um, this is this is kind of a long discussion on some of the issues that I have. What sort of teaching is this going on in the church? Um, um, if you feel that income inequality is an injustice between whites and blacks, I was like, okay, so what do you think about a white pastor just giving himself a 20% raise? Uh, I don't know. We don't know how much he's making, but I'm saying if you want income inequality, why don't you just start? Why don't you start in your own church and follow your own advice if you feel you've been too privileged? I'm just pointing that out. I mean, who's going to decide? Who's going to decide how this justice is going to be meted out? It creates all sorts of problems. One thing you don't want to do. So I will grant that there is injustice, a variety of injustices in the United States, that there is racism, but you don't fix those problems by creating more injustice or by just blanket insinuating people are um, behaving badly when you don't know that for sure. That may not be the underlying cause for inequalities. So there are inequalities, but it's not necessarily because of injustice. And if you try to equalize things, be careful that you're not creating more injustice in the process. Affirmative action is one example of that. So, and I saw in S.J. Thomason's program, what about the American Indians? So the Europeans and the Spanish conquistadors came and they took all the Native American land. You talk about injustices there, and I mean, I'm totally saying that there's been bad things going down all over the world, but how are we going to reconcile reconcile all the evils that have been done? It's my policy is you don't create more evil in the process of trying to fix something, especially deeds done by people that are long dead, and trying to take it out on other people that may not even be their descendants. So this is just ripe for creating more division and creating more hurt rather than healing. That's my feeling. That's my feeling. I respect that there are people in McLean Bible who will not agree with me, and I respect that. Let me point out some of the composition of the group, though, that David Platt was saying is spreading disinformation. I saw some African Americans in that group. So I want to quell any insinuation that this is some sort of racist group. It's not. And I did see a lot of Asians in the group too. A lot of Asians and Hispanics. That being said, there's been some unfortunate exchanges. I would say choice of words that were not the wisest. The, kind of from some people that would be sympathetic to where I'm at, but And this is getting a little bit out of hand. Like I said, there's a lot of money and power at stake here. We don't know where this is going, but $150 million is a lot for a church to be holding. Anyone who can take control of that has a big pulpit to influence people, and there could be a big money flow. So let me see before I keep ranting here. There's been something that is also disconcerting. Why are either staff or former pastors put under non-disclosure agreements? If the staff or former pastors who have been instrumental in building the church, I think that the present congregation would like to hear what they have to say. They would value their opinion. Why is there a non-disclosure agreement? Is there something that's being hidden? This does not look good. And I've heard, and this can be confirmed or disconfirmed, that the compensation, like some of the retired pastors, their compensation is tied to their non-disclosure agreement. So if there's a pastor of McLean Bible who had been building up the congregation, why is there a gag order that he can't speak? This is by and large a lot of the congregation that he helped shepherd and build. Why can't he have a say? It just doesn't look good. It means like, yes, it may give the present leaders a lot more freedom without having to worry about someone objecting. So I don't know. That doesn't look good. In the last, under David Platt's tenure, I've seen a lot of ministries just eliminated. Ministries like the clothing ministry. I don't believe there was hardly any money devoted to that. People were donating clothing and they were giving it away. Why was that stopped? Why was that stopped? And yet we're spending more time talking about racial injustice. What about taking care of the poor like that? Why was the clothing ministry stopped? McLean has done a good job in distributing food, but still, that was like, there are people volunteering their time to do this. Why was that stopped? There's like the single moms ministry. There were other ministries like the Turkey Outreach, mothers of preschool children, music ministries, Mothering Matters, Saturday morning, adult choir, kid stuff. I mean, these are names that would just, people outside of McLean might not know. So let me just highlight some things. This is, yes, see, this is the reaction I got when this is exactly the reaction I got when I revealed this to other members. And it was also the reaction I was having when it was told me. Non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, have been increasingly used to muzzle people within evangelical and Christian organizations. They can also hide misconduct and suppress evidence and testimony. Add the gag order tied to the reimbursement compensation. Very corrupt. Okay, yeah. Anytime NDAs are involved in churches, that's a very bad sign. Okay, see, I'm okay. Exactly my feelings. This does not make me feel good. On the other hand, it doesn't make me feel good to vote against the current leadership. I don't want to be involved in this fight. Like I said, I kind of prefer the grocery model where I'm not involved. The grocery store model, I'm sorry. Exactly. Exactly my point. Why should they? Okay, so if we have the grocery store model, it's like, okay, I go to the grocery store as long as I like it. And then when I don't like going there or they don't serve my needs, I'm not a part of the grocery store. I'm not going to try to be involved in deciding who manages it or how they handle their finances. That's up to them. It's just kind of a mutual transaction. I don't want to get my hands dirty into all this. This is like me telling other people, this is how you got to do things. That is not my personality, because I have such kind of that feeling of free markets, and it's like, okay, um, uh, I, I would have felt much more comfortable not sticking my nose into something like this. It's like, okay, um, you guys decide on your church, you elect your leaders. I'll keep donating as long as I like what I'm hearing, and I'll keep coming as long as I like what I'm hearing and what I see, and when I see you're doing what's right. Otherwise, I'll just leave. But they were just saying, oh, it's really important for you to be a member somewhere, and why don't you be a member at McLean, and you have rights and responsibilities. It's like, okay, I signed up for it, and I feel now that I have my voting rights. Guys, you could, in the chat, I appreciate your feedback here. You could see why my concern here. I don't think this is, while I'm still a voting member and while I'm trying to help that congregation, I want to stop what I'm seeing. I want to see more transparency. I want those non-disclosure agreements removed. I'd rather find out, rather than removing it, why don't you tell us what you're hiding? Okay, that'd be more important to me. And so you see where this is going. So to my fellow members in McLean, I've given you, I said I really don't want to stick my nose in other people's business. I like the grocery store model better, and I don't want to get involved in this fight. But since I'm there and I have a vote, I can exercise it, and I think for the better good. But this is a tough decision. So let me just, especially, yes, people have told me that is probably one of the most significant things is the non-disclosure agreement tied to compensation. And oh boy, yes, there is a congregation that has enough money to get a $150 million complex paid off. Paid off. There's a lot of money there collectively, and there's just a lot of money there, and you wonder how that can happen. This is an influential area. It is in probably the richest area of the United States, at least income wise, and and some people are pass away or whatever, they'll will sometimes large amounts of their estate to a church, and there are other reasons. People are just could also be very generous. It just happens. That's just that's kind of the culture in northern Virginia. Um, so let me see what else is on my list. So there has been a drop in attendance. One set of figures, and it's not the only one. So this can be contested. That it fell from like about 19,000 in May. In April of 2020, within less than a year, it's now 7,500. That's a loss of about 11,500 attendees. That's a lot. And let's see what else I have. I think I've actually covered most of it. So this vote will come out in about 8 days. And So that's about it. I've talked. I meant this to be a 10-minute talk. You know me. I'm not very succinct. In 10 days, then the present leadership could be very much at risk of being eliminated and replaced. And so there's going to be a series of votes. So the first vote was on June 30th. The next one, which is also kind of sketchy because it's going to be held during a worship service. What's that about? Oh, and I got to tell you something. The last vote, and the last vote, June 30th, people had to bring their IDs, and people were saying, "Oh, you're off the rolls." I was wondering if I was going to be taken off the rolls. I was on there, but people that had voiced dissent through their emails, the church leadership said, "Oh, that means they're not going to be active here. We'll scrub them from the rolls." And until you actually say you're not a member anymore, that's kind of sketchy. That brought up some issues. There are people driving from Florida, which is like a 17-hour drive, to McLean to cast their vote. Now, I know I met that couple that was involved in this. They own a house 15 minutes, 20 minutes from the church. They're in the process of moving. I don't know that they have actually formally rescinded their membership, and they're big donors. Okay, there's a reason they're moving down to Florida. Okay, they probably got a lot of money. They're big donors, and they're very upset with all this racial justice stuff. Oh, Emery, you missed maybe some of the juicy stuff. You might want to rewind this. And they're told, "Oh, you've been scrubbed off the rolls." They haven't been reinstated. Someone reportedly drove from Maine because she's taking care of a sick relative, and they said, "Well, you're out of town, you can't vote." That's at least the story I'm getting from the Capstone report. And so, Emery, you've read this. Now, the problem is, how can church leadership make a determination like that if you can't trust your members who've been long time in contributing to your church? Now, just because they don't like the leadership and what they're hearing, you're going to scrub them from the rolls? That's kind of sketchy. So what happened on June 30th? Get this. They had a law firm volunteered, and that's because one of the either current or former members who really did help the church was part of that law firm. The law firm was conducting the count. This is how, first time in church history we had a law firm counting the number of votes. A law firm. Furthermore, and I have pictures of the parking lot and also the lobby, we had several Fairfax County police cruisers just to maintain the peace in case anything broke out. Nothing happened, but at the beginning of the congregational meeting, they said, "No reporters, no recording." I'm just like, why? Where's the transparency here? You don't want it to be visible to the whole public that this meeting was totally peaceful. There was no disruption. Everyone was well behaved, and they still voted against the leadership without any ruckus. That just doesn't fit the narrative. And the county police officers were walking right in there in the middle of our congregational meeting. It was a sight. I'm just like, okay. I saw 3 Fairfax County police officers with their guns. I'm just like, yeah, okay. This is a Christian meeting. Okay, that's not all bad, okay? Because occasionally there are psychos that have threatened our pastors, and that's. But the optics were just not good, okay, guys. So I'm not saying, you'll see it in the Capstone report that this looked like threat and intimidation. I think I wouldn't go so far as saying it's threat and intimidation, because me having dealt with some people on the internet, they're psycho. You just, I'm actually grateful, but it still didn't, the tone of the meeting looked like, um, we're here to be enforcers, because they did not allow discussion. It was a totally orchestrated meeting. There's no chance, for example, when the three elder nominees who are going to be elected, and this is something complex in the whole church constitution, when the three elder nominees were put up for election, they said, okay, this is a vote on whether you feel these men are godly or qualified. We didn't have a chance to ask. And I pointed out this whole thing about, okay, we don't like doing it, but we vet, a lot of churches will vet people who work in the children's Sunday school. They'll do background checks, dig up all the dirt. And you don't like having to, when you ask these questions, it's like an insinuation. It's like, well, you still got to do that. You need to find out. And I got a lot of concerns, and so do others. And after I voted no, I found it even more. I'm just like, no way. Now, to be fair, if any of those elder nominees want to answer some questions, I can give you some. I can give them some, and they're going to be pretty tough questions. Because it's like, well, yes, I would like, if someone has been falsely accused, I'd like the reputation to be cleared. But I got to tell you, this is not looking good. The stuff with the non-disclosure agreements, and it's like, I'm going to ask you tough questions. It's like, are you okay with that? Are you okay with that? And then I'm going to ask even tougher questions. And I'm not going to go there today, because this is really getting very sensitive, if you know what I mean. But yeah, there's just yeah. Now I remember what I wanted to say. There were 5 elder nominees ahead of them. So consider now collectively over the last year a pool of 8 elder nominees. One of them I knew. 5 of them went to the leadership and complained about the lack of transparency, the money flows, that no one seems to know where the money's going, the non-disclosure agreements, and the racial justice woke stuff. They complained to the leadership. The leadership, I'm told, and the leadership is welcome to contest this narrative, I'm told that the leadership invited those 5 elder nominees to leave. They left. I know one of them. I've known him for something like 17 years. Heart-wrenching for him to leave, because he invested so much in the church. I saw him he was teaching 3 classes at the church. He is a naval officer, retired naval officer, had a full-time job, has a child that has special needs, and he's teaching 3 classes. It's like 3 different Sunday schools, but 2 of them are during the week. If you know people who are familiar with how churches are run, that's dedication. He was above reproach. He was, by the way, professor of physics at Annapolis Naval Academy. The guy's just stellar. And there were other stellar guys. So we had the 3 new ones that were voted down. We had the 5 that were invited to leave. That left the 3 ones that were probably obviously on board with the current direction of the church. Some simple questions that wanted to be raised is like, how long have these elder nominees been attending McLean? Some have thought that they've only been there for 1 year. And yet we have these 5 nominees that were uninvited, with decades of serving the church and having stellar reputations, but maybe the only big mark against them is they objected to the lack of transparency, the non-disclosure agreements, the racial justice, the woke stuff. The affiliation with the Southern Baptist Convention. Oh, Emery is never short of his opinions. By the way, Emery is not a member of McLean Bible Church, nor do I expect him to be anytime soon because he's far away from here. I shouldn't laugh because he is my pastor after all. This is the big one. This Sunday on July 4th, David Platt said, guys like me are spreading disinformation that McLean Bible Church is not affiliated with the Southern Baptist Convention. Okay, there's a lot of funny stuff going on here. The members of McLean and others on my side began digging up someone very determined to get to the bottom of all this. He looked up all the documents and even public website stuff. He didn't have to do anything underhanded. Very upfront. He contacted the Southern Baptist Convention. Is McLean affiliated? They said, oh yeah. And then we have Dr. Sandy Pigeon here. He was a student. He got his doctorate through the Southern Baptist Convention. And the Southern Baptist Convention asked him, Mr. Pigeon or Commander Pigeon, are you a member of McLean Bible Church? Because you can get a discount. Because if so, let us look that up. What's the church? They asked him, what church is he a member of? He said, McLean, or something like that. He can retell the story more exactly than I. I'm just giving it secondhand. I hope he will appear on this channel to discuss this. So they asked him if he's a member, what church he's a member of. And they said, oh, that's great, because McLean's affiliated. We're going to give you thousands of dollars in discounts. Like, okay, so McLean's affiliated, and in a way that counts, he gets a discount. So do other people who are members of McLean that are attending Southern Baptist Seminary, Southern Baptist Convention Seminary. They're getting discounts. This is thousands of dollars. And, McLean is, after all, sending hundreds of thousands of dollars there. This is still kind of funny. I mean, if McLean wants to give financial assistance to their own members, that'd be more direct. Why go through the Southern Baptist Convention? What deals are being struck here? Where's the money flow? This just, the optics of this just doesn't look good. And so what was really funny, we can, fear is being fear. It's like, Sandy, you left McLean because of the affiliation, and it's more subtle than that. It's the fact that the leadership was not forthright. And it wasn't always clear. Sandy was a new believer when he started going to seminary, going to Christian colleges. And like a lot of people, like myself, we don't, we may not even give a thought about the church I didn't even know of all the bylaws and amendments or whatever's in the church constitution, because it's kind of like a big legal document. A lot of people don't know that we weren't supposed to affiliate this or that. And it's like, okay, that could be an oversight. But you'd expect the church leadership, when they make a commitment, they should be familiar with what they can and cannot obligate the church to. And one thing that you can't obligate McLean Bible, because the people that form the church, that's kind of a contract with the congregation. It's like, we're not going to let you be shepherded and influenced by an outside entity. Now, some congregations, it's like, okay, they're planted by a church or a denomination, help them. They'll be shepherded by that parent denomination. But this is, McLean Bible said they didn't want to be tangled up with, they wanted their independence. So that's kind of a contract with the congregation, congregation to and conduct. If that's not what you want, then you can go to another one. But the point is that we don't know who all worked out these deals and to what level of detail, but we are affiliated. David Platt came out this Sunday, July 4th, and in the capstone report, Emery, if you have the capstone report for July 5th, you can drop it in the link. The sermon, he specifically said, we're not affiliated. Now, what happened was when the Southern Baptist Convention, first of all, got this plagiarist had this president elected who's now caught in Sermongate, what they call Sermongate scandal that broke out like in the last month. And it just looks really bad. Plus, he's liberal and woke, and accusations are flying that he's not very biblical. Yeah. There are a lot of people in McLean that don't want to be affiliated with this. It's like they don't want to be subservient to organizations that's promoting things that they feel the Bible doesn't teach. And so that's another reason that we don't want this affiliation, not to mention it's the constitutional agreement of the church. But on top of that, once the SBC, that I now feel is starting to get really corrupt, got wind of what was going on at McLean, and the McLean leadership contacted them, the SBC wrote back and said, "Oh, you're not really affiliated. It's kind of, it might be on our databases this way, but we're not really affiliated." And it's like, okay, so this is starting to look really bad. It's like, okay, so now both parties are trying to cover for each other. That's what it looks like to me. But the bottom line is, why doesn't the McLean leadership give us the money flows? Tell us how much congregational money is being sent to the SBC directly or indirectly. 41 to 47 church plants. We're planning these churches in the name of the Southern Baptist Convention using congregational money. And how much compensation does Dave Platt get for each one that he plants? We would like to know that. So it just doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. I would like them to try to just set this straight. It's very easy. Let the auditors come in and give us an independent audit. It's not that hard. Release these non-disclosure agreements. Stop tying retirement compensation to the non-disclosure agreement. I mean, there are any number of things you guys could be doing that could just make this better. So like I said, I don't know what to do with this situation right now. Maybe it'll be all over in 8 days. If David Platt succeeds in persuading the congregation, doing a worship service to submit their ballots. Oh, by the way, that's the other thing. This round of ballots, your name's going to be on it. They'll know who voted no. Your name's going to be on it, as far as I've heard, plus with an identifying number. That's going to be interesting. What is very disturbing about this is paid staff who may not like what's going on. Their vote is going to be registered. They're vulnerable. The donors, it's like, yeah, big deal. You kick me out of the church. You're not going to get any more money from me. Okay. But it's the paid staff we're really worried about. They could be intimidated. And the paid staff who might actually be under non-disclosure agreements there too. So, yeah. So I wonder if we're going to see the Fairfax County Police out in force again. And they're just walking through the sanctuary in the middle of the worship service, and they're taking these ballots. It's going to be a scene. As I said, the capstone report made it sound like this is intimidation. I wouldn't go quite that far, but it's still it can be made to look that way. That it's meant to make us feel marginalized for saying no. It's insinuating we're going to disrupt the meeting. Unfortunately, there have been some. I've heard some disruptions, and that's just too bad. So we'll just see how all this plays out. And I'm really glad that let me see, Emery's here. Emery, you never mince words. Yeah, there's discount. Yeah, if you're a member of McLean Bible Church and you go to a Southern Baptist seminary, you'll get a discount on tuition. You'll get a discount on tuition. So we can hear that. If Sandy comes on, he can explain that. You see, now, to be charitable, I'm going to try to be really charitable here. SBC gave the McLean leadership kind of an out. They could say, well, we define affiliation differently than some others. And let's just say, let's grant that for the sake of argument. The point is, if the congregation views this as inconsistent with the spirit of the Constitution, and that it is by all practical purposes affiliation, they have the right to say, we think what happened was wrong, and we can vote the leadership out. There's no reason to say that that's disinformation. Because if they view it that way, that this is kind of misleading, I'm not going to use the word lie, but if this is misleading and it should have been clarified, they can object and say the leadership can be removed on grounds of, just letting this, to be polite, to, incompetence of just letting this happen. The other thing is, in other documents I read, it requires a congregational vote before any papers are signed that cause affiliation. And given that you had all the indications that this is an affiliation, that was never done. That's also bad. This just doesn't look good. And like Mr. Jetty 89 pointed out, when you see one cockroach, there are probably 10 hiding somewhere. This is what feels very uncomfortable. So yeah, personally, I feel the language of the capstone report was a little bit overstated. That's just my feeling. It didn't have to go quite. Could have been a little. It would have actually been more persuasive if their language were more guarded. So people can state things that are untrue without necessarily lying. It's possible David Platt just got his information from his underlings and he's just accepting it on their word. But I do want to point out something. Okay, you're this couple from Florida. You've been donating a lot to the church. You have nothing to gain driving 17 hours to cast this vote, except that you want to save the congregation. There's no personal money that they're going to gain from this. Absolutely none. They're doing that as a matter of conscience. Same for that voter who came from Maine. And think of this. They drove all these miles or flew them only to be denied a vote. And they'd been a part of the church. And I do know that the case of the ones from Florida, they own a home 15 miles from McLean. The wife lives there and can attend. I don't know all the exact other details. I mean, I had dinner with them on June 27th. They're seated at my table. So there you go, Emery. People that are in that capstone report were at my dinner table June 27th, 3 days before the first series of votes. They struck me as very sincere people. They cared very much about the church that they helped support and build. and they have godly children that are involved in the ministry, and there are just lots of these very good, sweet people. I don't know if I may have conversations and try to get them on this channel, let them tell their story. What do they have to gain by getting involved in this? And that's also my story. It's like, I prefer the grocery model. Like I said, the grocery store model. I don't want to be tied up in this mess. I'd rather like the grocery store take care of its own, and I'll just stop going when I don't like it. I prefer not being involved. And, but if I could tell you one reason I decided to become a member of McLean, it was because my dear friend Dan Callahan was running the apologetics ministry at McLean Bible Church. He's been my friend for almost 42 years, since back in the days of Virginia Tech, the college I flunked out of. I got my degrees from another college than Virginia Tech, but I met him at Virginia Tech my freshman year. I've known him for 40, 42 years, something like that. Yeah, 41 years now, 41 years. And I said, that ministry you built, I want to help out. And I said, okay, if I help lead the ministry, because I had the creation science background, I should become a member of this church. That's how I got involved. If I could have been a part of the ministry there and just adopting the grocery store model, I would have preferred to do that. But this is how I got tied up into all this. And it was very hard for me to drive up there. I had to pay for elder care for my mother the few times, and I just constantly, worried about her safety when I was gone from the house, and trying to make arrangements for her care was tough, if given how my mom was. And I had to get very special permission that while she's alive, I could still be part of the local congregation here, so I could be geographically close to her. And plus the church locally here, McLean Bible, would be taking care of her. But the elder who interviewed me said, once she passes away, you have to come back to McLean. So I'm back. I am back. And that elder sadly was in a bicycle accident, and half his body's paralyzed. And so he had to step down as elder of McLean. But I hear that he's not very happy with all that's happened there. But given his physical condition, and he's also mentally worn out from the trauma of having half his body paralyzed, and then doing what he can to support McLean Bible. He can't participate. So this is the situation, and this is kind of long-winded, but yeah, thank you. Yeah, I risk getting scrubbed from the rolls, but this again, it's like, what do I have to lose? I have nothing to lose. If they scrub me from the rolls, I've been inconvenienced, and I, I don't have to be feeling like I have to be participating and voting in congregational meetings anymore. Maybe I won't participate very much in the apologetics ministry there, but given that they've canceled ministries and given us the cold shoulders, so much so, and I got to call this out, some of the members of the apologetics ministry have been requesting, okay, this is a $150 million complex. If you saw the thumbnail, $150 million complex. They have multiple auditoriums and classrooms. We requested a small classroom on a weeknight. We haven't even gotten word back whether yes or no we can even meet to have apologetics meetings. What is this $150 million complex being used for? And I have a document here that says that something that's very incriminating. I may get some of the details incorrect. Let me see if I can. Yes. I think I have it. What's wrong? Let's see if I could find it. Okay. Yes, this is incriminating. Okay, so the apologetics, we can't even get, like, say, a Tuesday or Wednesday night. The leader over me, he wrote and requested rooms be reserved for us. Not even the courtesy of an email back. That bothers me. So if they kick me out and I can't participate in the apologetics ministry, it's like, well, not much would have changed anyway. But get this. Why does the SBC, New City Network, and David Platt's Radical organization get office space in that sanctuary complex, but ministries that volunteers are offering don't? We don't even get a classroom to conduct. So, short answer to Conrad, yes. So I was explaining how I got involved in all this because I cared very much for a ministry that my friend built there. The one creationist ministry in a megachurch. It's so rare. This could be the last creationist ministry in a megachurch, honestly. If this goes down, there may be only one or two megachurches in the United States that will have creationism taught, and we were one of them. And that's why I decided to become a member. But, the tide may be against us, and I might have to go in exile again, and that's okay, because then I'm with you guys here on the internet. So, to my brothers and sisters at McLean, I don't know what's going to happen at the vote. Barring any changes in 8 days, I'm going to be voting no against the leadership. And after the smoke clears, that's when I'll just take it a day at a time what I'm going to do. But I do want to serve McLean Bible, and we'll see. We'll just see how all this plays out. I hope for those of you who are my brothers and sisters who have seen this, see me give my perspective, and I thank you for hanging with me for about an hour and a half. I hope maybe you have some information you didn't have before. And I'm sorry to have gotten involved in all of this, but it's also just the process of making this video has given me a way to understand my own thoughts on this. So with that, problems in the church are not new. In the history of Christendom, the Lord saw all of this happening, and the five of the seven churches in Revelation, Jesus had some issues with them, and so it happens. Since the beginning of Christ's church, there have been problems in the congregations, but Christianity has moved forward. The kingdom of Christ is moving forward, and that's why I have peace about this. However this turns out, it's Christ's kingdom is moving forward. And maybe a closing thought is that even someone who identifies as an atheist by the name of Tom Holland, and I prayed for him today that he become a Christian because he understands things. He said, that the Christian message is Jesus on the cross, on the Roman cross. That Christian theme that the oppressed, Christ was the most oppressed person. He was innocent and he was oppressed. But being on that Roman cross and dying, he was the victor. And that is the difference in viewing what suffering and oppressed means. That God will work all things for the good of those who love him and who are his people. And he said, he never realized that he had just assumed everything's going to work for the good, but that's really a Christian theme. And so, he doesn't yet fully believe it in terms of, uh, and historical reality, but he said he's adopted it. He said he's fully Christian in terms of his morals and ethics, and then also his outlook. But for those of us here today, we accept it as real, that Jesus Christ dying on the cross, he was the victor, not the Pharisees or the Romans. He is the victor, and his kingdom will come, and that's what counts. Nothing will stop our Lord. We may fumble, and we may not handle our affairs here on earth too well, but nothing will stop our Lord, and that's what counts, and that's what we can rest our hopes in. So thank you all for joining me this very late night. Take care. God bless you, and may the Lord be with you.